The archivist was the kind of man few noticed, a soft shadow moving among the endless shelves of forgotten manuscripts. His colleagues barely remembered his name, and even the students who occasionally passed through the old library thought of him as part of the dust that lingered in the air. He was neither ambitious nor loud, and the world rewarded such invisibility with indifference. Yet it was this very quietness that gave him time to notice the box, an unmarked chest tucked behind rusting cabinets in the basement, untouched for decades. He bent to it slowly, his fingers brushing across the wood. It was sealed, not with nails, but with a kind of resin that had hardened like stone. No catalog tag, no record in the archives, nothing to indicate why it was there. The lock was ancient, a simple clasp that seemed almost ceremonial. For a long moment, he hesitated. His heart beat faster than it had in years, a drum echoing in the still silence of the basement. Something inside him whispered, "This is no ordinary box." When he pried it open, a small cloud of dust escaped like the ghost of centuries past. Inside lay a single object, a thick, fragile codex, bound in faded bark paper, its edges crumbling at the touch. The cover bore glyphs carved in dark ink, the kind he had only seen in reference texts about the Maya. His throat tightened, his breath caught. He whispered to himself, "It can't be." The first pages he turned revealed painted glyphs, meticulously drawn, preserved against time's cruelty. But unlike the ceremonial codices displayed in museums, this one felt different. The ink was bold, urgent, as though the scribe had not written for ritual but for warning. Images of fire, floods, and collapsing structures filled the margins. The archivist's pulse hammered louder. The symbols were unfamiliar, an unrecorded dialect. Perhaps a lost tongue, but their intention was clear. They spoke of endings. In the dim glow of the basement lamp, he began to scribble translations on loose paper. His knowledge of Mayan scripts was not that of a trained scholar, but he had always nurtured an obsessive fascination, spending nights years ago devouring texts when others laughed at his hobby. He traced the lines carefully, comparing, recalling old notes, and as the words began to form, the silence deepened around him. The codex did not merely recount history, it issued prophecy. His mind raced. What if this is real? What if it tells of events yet to come? But another voice inside him, smaller, wounded, whispered back, "No one will believe you. They never have." He remembered the academic conference long ago, when he had presented a paper with trembling hands. He remembered the laughter of professors, the way their mocking glances had followed him out of the hall. That day, his path to academia had ended. He had chosen obscurity because it hurt less than ridicule. And yet, here it was. Proof. Vindication. A secret buried in the dust, waiting for someone overlooked enough to find it. For hours, he stayed hunched in the basement, translating symbols that felt alive beneath his pen. The codex spoke of great upheavals, of rivers running red, of skies split with fire. He read a line that chilled his bones. When the serpent eats its own tail, the world of men will tremble. He closed his eyes, the image searing itself into his mind. Was it metaphor? Was it madness? Or was it a key to the fate of civilizations? Above him, the library remained quiet, the world unaware of what he held. A book that should not exist, words that scholars would kill to see, warnings that might shape the future. The archivist pressed the codex to his chest, trembling, as though holding both salvation and doom in his arms. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, the narrator's voice whispered into the silence of imagination, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of the scholars' lives. And with that, he turned another page. The archivist barely slept. His dreams were broken visions of burning temples and endless oceans rising over cities he half recognized. When the morning light filtered through his window, he returned to the library before the sun had fully climbed the sky. He descended into the basement with the eagerness of a man chasing salvation. The codex waited for him like a living thing, its pages faintly musty yet strangely preserved, as if time itself had conspired to keep it intact for him alone. He set the fragile book on a desk, his trembling fingers reaching for his notebook. Each symbol demanded patience, yet he felt as if the glyphs were whispering, urging him to hurry. The language was a variation he had never seen, but hints of the known Mayan system were buried within. He traced a single serpent-shaped glyph again and again, his pencil etching grooves into the paper. The words he pieced together chilled him. "The serpent devours itself," he muttered, lips dry. "The stars fall in mourning. The fire eats the water and the sky is torn." He leaned back, stunned by his own translation. These were not the ceremonial hymns or calendrical counts of typical codices. No, this was a warning, strung with despair. The archivist's mind raced. Had a Mayan priest seen visions of catastrophe? Had he written this as a desperate message across centuries? His pulse thundered as he turned another page. This one was worse figures drawn with twisted faces, men holding staffs that bled fire, women weeping beside rivers thick with corpses. The archivist's throat tightened. For a moment, he thought he could hear the distant cries of those long-dead voices. An inner voice, one he had spent years burying, rose from within. "Why you? Why now? You couldn't even defend yourself when they laughed you off that stage. You are no scholar." But another thought clashed against it, fragile but persistent. "Because I was meant to find it. Because no one else would have looked." He pressed forward. The codex spoke of cycles, ages that rose and fell, each ending in chaos. The final section he translated that morning made his hands go cold. The last age ends when the false kings deny the truth, and the quiet one speaks. His pen froze mid-sentence. He read the line again. "The quiet one." He whispered it aloud, tasting the words. A shiver crawled across his skin. Could it be coincidence? Or was the codex speaking to him directly across the ages? As the hours slipped by, he scrawled translations faster, desperate to capture every word. He filled pages with warnings of disasters, eerily familiar, great storms, plagues, trembling earth. Some he recognized as events that had already scarred the modern world. Hurricanes, pandemics, earthquakes. The codex listed them with uncanny precision. And then it hinted at more yet to come. Disasters greater than any before. The archivist rubbed his temples, exhaustion gnawing at him. Fear clawed at his chest, but beneath it burned a fragile ember of excitement. If he was right, if this was genuine, then he had uncovered something no living scholar had ever seen. He closed his eyes for a moment, but the symbols danced behind his lids, refusing to release him. He saw fire raining from the skies. He saw oceans swallowing coastlines. And always, always the serpent devouring itself. Endless, eternal. By the time footsteps echoed faintly above in the library, he realized he had spent an entire day in the basement. He looked down at the codex, at his frantic notes, and felt both wonder and terror. This was no mere relic. This was a voice from the past, screaming into the present. And deep within his heart, he knew he could not keep it to himself. The archivist's hands trembled as he carried his notes and the codex into the upstairs reading room. For the first time in years, he felt a strange urgency to share what he had found. His entire life had been spent unseen, unnoticed, and perhaps ridiculed. But this discovery was different. It had weight, power, a message carved into time itself. Surely the scholars would understand. Surely they would listen. He rehearsed the words in his mind. Unique codex, previously undocumented glyphs, prophetic content, unlike any other Mayan text. His heart pounded as he pictured the professors from the university, men and women who had laughed at him before. But this time would be different. He had proof. When he finally called them, his voice cracked with restrained excitement. Within a day, 3 senior professors arrived, experts in Mesoamerican languages, their reputations built on years of celebrated research. They carried themselves with the casual arrogance of men convinced they had already seen everything worth seeing. He placed the codex on the table before them with reverence, like an offering. "This," he whispered, "is unlike anything in recorded collections. Look at the glyphs. Look at the structure." One of the professors leaned in, squinting, then chuckled. "Another forgery, no doubt. We've seen plenty of these crop up in dusty corners." The archivist's chest tightened. "Number, please. Look carefully. This is bark paper. The pigments are authentic. The dialect, it's a variation unrecorded in our databases. And the content," another professor, a woman with sharp eyes and sharper words, waved dismissively. "Content? You mean your translations? You've been out of the academic field for, 20 years? Why would you expect us to take your word seriously?" Their laughter was soft at first, then louder, echoing in his ears like it had all those years ago at the failed conference. The archivist felt the weight of humiliation pressing against his ribs. He wanted to defend himself, to shout, "This is real! This will change everything!" But the words caught in his throat. Still, he forced himself forward, sliding his notebook toward them. Look at this line. It describes disasters, events that have already happened. It predicted them centuries before they occurred." One professor skimmed the page, then scoffed. "Coincidence? You're seeing patterns where none exist. This isn't scholarship, it's fantasy." The archivist clenched his fists beneath the table, nails biting into his palms. Inside, his thoughts screamed, "Why do they never listen? Why am I always invisible until they want someone to mock?" Yet another part of him, weary and broken, whispered, "Perhaps they are right. Perhaps I am a fool chasing ghosts." But the codex lay before them, real and undeniable, its glyphs carved in ink that had defied centuries. It felt alive beneath the lamplight, almost pulsing with its own truth. He watched the professors dismiss it, watched them turn away with smirks and rolled eyes, and something within him hardened. He would not let them bury it. Not this time. "You're wrong," he said quietly, but with a tremor of resolve. "This codex is real, and when you realize the truth, it will already be too late." They laughed again, gathering their coats, muttering about wasted time. Their voices faded down the corridor, leaving the archivist alone with the codex, his humiliation, and a rising fury that burned hotter than the shame. For the first time in years, he swore to himself he would not be silenced. That night, after the professors left him broken in the echo of their laughter, the archivist sat alone in his apartment, with the codex spread open across his table. The lamplight flickered faintly, casting shadows across the glyphs that seemed to move with the trembling of his hands. He stared at the symbols, but his mind was not on the present moment. It was drifting back to the years when he had been someone else. There was a time when he had not been invisible, a time when his hunger for knowledge had burned so bright it threatened to consume him. He had been a student then, young and desperate, poring over every scrap of Mayan history he could find. Nights were spent in dim dormitory rooms with stacks of books, days lost in the archives until librarians shooed him out. His professors had admired his passion until it turned into obsession. He remembered the conference most vividly, his one chance. He had been trembling as he stood before the audience, presenting his theory about an untranslated Mayan fragment he had uncovered. His voice shook, but his eyes had burned with conviction. He had believed he was offering them something extraordinary. Instead, they had torn him apart. A senior scholar had laughed openly at him, calling his work the fever dream of a boy who reads too many adventure stories. Another dismissed his translation as wishful thinking, not research. The sound of their laughter had crushed something inside him that day. He had walked out of that hall humiliated, his notes crumpled in his hands, and when no one offered him another chance, when doors began to close, he withdrew. He buried his passion in silence and took a job in the library, surrounded by the dust of other people's discoveries. As he sat with the codex now, that memory burned anew, twisting like a knife. His inner voice echoed with the old wound. You will never be taken seriously. You were meant for dust, not for history. Yet here, in his trembling hands, lay proof that he had been right all along. Proof that he had not been chasing illusions, but truths too terrifying for the arrogant to recognize. He whispered into the empty room, "They were wrong about me. They've always been wrong." He touched the pages gently, as though the codex were breathing. He traced the serpent glyph again and again, his fingers trembling. This wasn't just about scholarship anymore. It was about vindication, about rising from the ashes of humiliation, about proving that even a man discarded could hold something that could shake the very foundations of the world. He leaned back, closing his eyes. If they won't listen, then I'll find another way. I will not let this codex die in obscurity. Not again. A sharp knock startled him. He quickly covered the codex with his notes, heart pounding. But it was only his neighbor passing by, asking if he had candles, because the building's power was flickering again. The archivist smiled faintly, shaking his head, but his mind was already returning to the fire building inside him. The humiliation of the past no longer defined him, it fueled him. And as he looked at the codex once more, he understood something chilling. The voices of the ancient scribes were not crying out for scholars in ivory towers. They had been waiting for someone like him, someone overlooked, someone forgotten, to finally speak their warning aloud. The next morning, the archivist awoke with a weight pressing against his chest. He had dreamed again, flashes of mountains trembling, seas swallowing cities, and fire raining from the heavens. The serpent glyph slithered through his dreams, consuming itself in an endless circle. He sat at the table, the codex open before him, and felt as though the ancient voices were pushing him forward, urging him to reveal more. With trembling hands, he traced the next set of symbols. His pencil scratched against the notebook as he worked through each figure, each line of ink that had survived centuries. The words that emerged made his skin prickle. The earth shall open in the place of smoke. The bird of iron will fall from the sky. The sickness of breath will choke the world. He froze. His mind immediately connected the dots. Earthquakes in Mexico, planes falling from the sky, pandemics choking entire nations. He stared at the codex, heart hammering as realization dawned. These were not vague metaphors. They were terrifyingly specific. He flipped further, devouring the text with his eyes. The codex listed one disaster after another, each chillingly accurate to modern times. It described storms of unprecedented fury, fires consuming entire forests, floods that drowned villages, events that matched hurricanes, wildfires, and floods he had read about in recent news. Then came the passage that stopped him cold. When the serpent devours its tail in the age of iron, fire shall swallow water, and the world of men shall tremble in its final days. His lips trembled as he read it aloud. The age of iron. Could that mean now? Skyscrapers, machines, cities forged of steel. It seemed impossible not to connect the dots. He leaned back in his chair, hands gripping his head. The archivist's thoughts spun wildly. If this is true, if the codex is warning of what comes next, then the disasters we've seen so far are only the beginning. His stomach churned. He thought of the professors laughing at him, their faces smug with dismissal. How could he possibly convince them now? They would only mock him harder. And yet, could he risk saying nothing? He shut his eyes, and a memory from childhood surfaced. Sitting at the kitchen table with his grandmother, who told him that sometimes the world hides its greatest truths in the mouths of the overlooked. The ones no one listens to, she had whispered, are often the ones who carry the real message. He opened his eyes, staring again at the codex. His heart ached with both fear and determination. Perhaps it doesn't matter if they laugh. Perhaps the truth doesn't need their permission. As he turned the next page, the images grew darker. Figures kneeling under skies filled with flame, rivers turning black, towers crumbling into dust. The archivist felt a shiver crawl down his spine. It was not just history he was holding. It was a prophecy that had already begun to unfold. And he realized, with a heavy certainty, that the codex was no longer just a discovery. It was a warning meant for the living, and the burden of carrying it now rested squarely on his shoulders. Word spread faster than the archivist had ever imagined. He had confided in only one person, a timid graduate student who often lingered in the library after hours, someone who looked at him not with disdain, but with curiosity. She had seen his frantic notes, the strange glyphs, the trembling way he spoke of disasters already written in the codex. She had promised silence, yet secrets of this magnitude rarely stay buried. By the end of the week, whispers had spread through academic circles. An unrecorded Mayan codex, prophecies too precise to ignore, a librarian who thinks he's a prophet. Each retelling twisted the story until it grew monstrous. Scholars scoffed publicly but whispered privately. Journalists called the university, pressing for interviews. And then, far more troubling, strangers began to linger around the library. Men in suits who didn't look like academics, their questions too pointed, their smiles too thin. One evening, as the archivist descended into the basement to check on the codex, he found the lock broken. His heart seized. He rushed forward, panic scraping his chest, but the codex was still there, untouched, as though the intruder had been interrupted. He clutched it tightly, his breath ragged. For the first time, he realized that what he held was not only a matter of knowledge, but of power. The codex did not just predict, it foretold. And if the wrong people believed they could harness such prophecy, it could become a weapon. That night, his phone rang. A voice on the other end was smooth, authoritative. "You have something that belongs to the world. It would be safer in our hands. We'll send someone tomorrow." The archivist gripped the receiver, sweat beading his brow. "It belongs to no one," he whispered, "and to everyone. You can't control it." The voice chuckled. "Control is everything, my friend. Think about that." The line went dead. Fear gnawed at him, but beneath it burned a stubborn fire. He thought of the professors who laughed, the humiliation that had buried him. Now others sought to steal his discovery, not out of skepticism, but because they believed. The irony cut deep. They mocked him when they thought him a fool, and now they hunted him when they realized he was right. The graduate student returned the next day, her face pale. "They're saying governments are interested. Some think it's a hoax, but others think it's a blueprint. They want to know the disasters before they happen, to prepare or to profit." The archivist's hands shook as he turned another page of the codex. The symbols seemed to blaze in the lamplight, alive with urgency. He could almost hear the scribe's voice across the centuries. "Protect this. Speak only truth. Beware those who would twist it." He shut the book gently, but his mind was anything but calm. The storm had broken. He was no longer an invisible man, hunched among forgotten shelves. He was the keeper of a prophecy that powerful men would kill to possess. And as he locked the codex away once more, he whispered to himself, "If they come for it, they'll have to come through me." The night of reckoning came with smoke. The archivist had hidden the codex as best he could, wrapped in oilcloth, locked in a cabinet no one had touched for decades. Yet even as he worked, he sensed inevitability pressing in. The voices on the phone had not been idle threats. And when the fire alarm shrieked through the library after midnight, he knew. Flames licked at the basement walls by the time he reached the codex. The air was thick with smoke, the glow of orange devouring the shadows. He coughed, clutching the book to his chest, feeling its fragile weight against him like a heartbeat. The fire was no accident. He could hear heavy footsteps above. The crash of doors forced open. They were here. Shadows emerged from the smoke, men in dark suits, faces hidden, eyes cold. One stepped forward, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Give us the codex. Knowledge that dangerous doesn't belong in the hands of one man." The archivist's lungs burned, but his voice carried a tremor of defiance. "It doesn't belong in your hands either. You'll twist it. You'll use it. The scribes didn't write this for tyrants." The man's jaw tightened. You think you can stop the tide of history? Give it to us, or it burns with you. The archivist's mind raced. He thought of the professor's laughter, of years spent invisible. He thought of the ancient hand that had written these words, desperate to warn the future. And he thought of his own vow, that the voices of the forgotten would not be silenced again. He backed toward the stairwell, clutching the codex as smoke swirled. If it burns, then the truth burns with me, and the blood will be on your hands. The men advanced. Flames roared louder, beams groaning as the building began to surrender. The archivist darted through the smoke, his heart hammering, his mind screaming with a single thought. Protect it, even if it costs everything. He stumbled into the reading room, fire trailing behind him. The graduate student burst through a side door, coughing, her eyes wide with horror. The whole place is burning. What have you done? They came for it, he gasped. They'll never stop. I can't let them have it. In that moment, choices narrowed to a knife's edge. He could run, attempt to save the codex at the risk of capture, or he could destroy it himself, robbing his pursuers of the power they craved, but also erasing the warnings forever. He looked at the flames, then at the codex, trembling in his hands. His soul warred between despair and duty. The voices of the ancient scribes seemed to scream in his ears. Choose, now. The graduate student grabbed his arm, eyes pleading. Don't let them take it. Do what must be done. The archivist hesitated only a heartbeat more. Then, with trembling resolve, he raised the codex high. The firelight flickered across its fragile pages, illuminating his face with both terror and defiance. What happened next would decide whether truth survived or perished in the flames. Weeks later, the ruins of the library still smoldered in the city's collective memory. Charred beams jutted skyward like blackened ribs, and the scent of ash lingered even after the winds carried most of it away. People whispered of the fire, of the strange men seen fleeing into the night, and of the quiet archivist who vanished in the flames. Some said he had perished, his body consumed along with the shelves of forgotten manuscripts. Others claimed they had seen him slip into the shadows with something clutched to his chest. The graduate student knew the truth. She alone had seen the archivist, that final night face streaked with soot, eyes fierce with a conviction she had never imagined in such a timid man. He had pressed the codex into her trembling hands at the last moment, whispering, "If they silence me, you must speak. The truth doesn't die if someone carries it." She had wanted to protest, to beg him to flee with her, but the fire roared louder, the pursuers closing in, and he had turned back into the inferno, drawing their attention, vanishing into the smoke. She had escaped through a side alley, the codex hidden beneath her coat, his voice echoing in her ears. In the weeks that followed, scholars debated what had been lost. The professors who once mocked the archivist now faced uneasy questions from the press. They muttered about forgery, about delusion, clinging to their pride even as rumors swelled. Yet deep down, many of them wondered, what if he had been right? What if the codex truly had spoken of things no man could have known? The graduate student, hidden in her small apartment, turned the pages slowly each night. She copied the symbols with painstaking care, remembering his translations, his warnings. Every line felt heavier now, every prophecy sharper in the shadow of his sacrifice. She realized that the archivist had not simply discovered an ancient text, he had lived its message. The forgotten had spoken, and arrogance had tried to erase it with fire. Months later, she published fragments anonymously. Scholars who once sneered at the archivist now scrambled to study them, their voices suddenly careful, reverent. The irony was not lost on her. They had mocked the quiet man until the flames consumed him. Only when he was gone did they admit he had been a keeper of something greater than themselves. And yet, the codex's warnings remained. More disasters lay ahead, storms, fires, upheavals still to come. She often wondered if the archivist had known that his own fate was written in those pages, that he would become the quiet one who speaks, even through death. Standing one evening at the edge of the library ruins, the graduate student whispered into the smoky air, "You were never invisible, not to the ones who listened." The moral of his story lingered like embers refusing to die. True strength is not always loud, nor is wisdom always celebrated. Sometimes the most overlooked voice carries the warning that could save the world, if only others have the humility to hear it. If this story touched you, the narrator's voice fades like an echo through time. Subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph.